Now, early as March last year, maybe a little bit before that, you were tweeting about inflation. So let's go into that a little bit. And you were predicting that with this crisis that's happening, that we're bound to get inflation. And you were one of sort of the first economists, if you like, predicting it. A lot of people weren't back then. They were ignoring it, and you were speaking out against it. Now, it's already signs that inflation is going up more. Do you believe the official story that it's transitory, that it's going to be passing through and, you know, everything's going to be okay? Or do you think it's going to sort of end up more like the 2008 crisis happening?
Well, in 2008, we didn't have inflation, except asset inflation, of course, but we're talking about consumer price inflation here. So, I mean, my analysis was that there's a big difference to the policies taken by central banks in 2020 compared to 2008 to 2009. Namely, there's an expansion in credit creation and broad money, and therefore affecting also the real economy and therefore consumer prices. And that has panned out. It looks like they've been slowing things down a little bit, which is good news, because my fear has been since last year that we're moving towards a Weimar style, 1923 style hyperinflation. And I think this is still very much on the cards, but I would prefer it if that was delayed by a few years, because that's a big thing, and that does need some preparation for people, at least those who see it and who understand what this means, to get ready for it, because it's devastating. It's completely devastating. So I was delighted to find that central bank credit creation seems to have slowed a little bit, and therefore at the moment it looks like, yes, we have inflation, and that's probably going to continue, but it's not yet moving into this accelerating scenario where you get higher and higher and higher inflation, and that's good. But I think ultimately that's still on the cards, given the overall scenario. I mean, you have to look at where we are and what has happened so far, and what central banks have done so far. And so I think it is still one of the core options that could be used in order to achieve a number of things, such as, this massive amount of debt that exists and national debt that exists, and ultimately inflation, of course, is a way of getting rid of that on the one hand, and also dealing with some of the goals that the planners like to achieve, including the more strategic and long-term goals of rearranging the global financial architecture, for which, again, big crises, and we are talking about a major crisis, not just like a 2008 one, because when you get hyperinflation, this really wipes out much of your economy, a certain part of the economy, the one that is not prepared, which usually means ordinary people and the majority of the population, and so on. But anyway, it's a major impact, and that's usually quite useful in order to rearrange the global financial architecture, if that's what you're planning to do. And of course, we have a lot of statements saying that, that's what they're planning to do. Okay,
so you think there's potential that they're trying to cause the crisis to have this global rearrangement?
Yes, of course, yes. And as you know from my book, Princes of the Yen, shown here, it turns out many crises have been engineered in order to achieve political and economic goals. And of course, we know already that the 2020 crisis has been due to government overreactions, to put it very mildly. In other words, entirely government caused, and therefore there are clear parallels to what I describe in Princes of the Yen, or in the documentary that's on YouTube. It's got now 2.7 million viewers.
Excellent. So we are just repeating history a little bit. We haven't learned from our mistakes yet.
Although I think a lot of people are beginning to learn.
Yes, good,
Yeah.
good. Okay, and for people who are then trying to buckle up and sort of look after their savings a little bit, do you have any advice for them? And what sort of good strategy would you suggest without giving financial advice necessarily? So,
Yeah, sure. Did you say ordinary savers?
yeah,
Or-
the ordinary person who's got a bit of money saved and they want to look after themselves.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It is tricky. Obviously, with inflation becoming an issue, that makes assets, and particularly real assets, more attractive. So property, real estate. But in some countries, they're already in bubble proportions, like Germany, where I warned in 2009 that that was likely to be the beginning of an asset bubble, and that was actually the bottom. And then it's been, as property prices have been rising since. So then, of course, when it's already very expensive, it's kind of tricky. But still, it's a fact that it's better to have real assets. Gold is also attractive. The price, in my view, has been artificially suppressed. But that means the opportunity is still there for investors to get in. And with gold, of course, the risk is that if it's known that you have gold, it may be confiscated, as happened in even the land of the free, right? In the United States of America in 1933, presidential executive order was issued to confiscate the gold of all people in America. And so it's best to buy it anonymously, so there's no record that you have the gold. But in many countries, they've now introduced ceilings to how much gold you're allowed to buy in cash without giving away your details. So that's something to keep in mind with gold. And otherwise, well, stocks fare reasonably well normally in an inflationary scenario. Obviously not all stocks, so you've got the selection problem, but you might want to go for indices. And of course, asset markets have been booming ever since, sort of March last year. I've been consistently in my investor letters telling people that stocks are quite attractive in most markets. It's a buy recommendation, and that's worked out very, very well.
Talking of gold, and you said about the price being suppressed artificially. Why is that? And how are they doing it?
The why, I think, is quite clear, because if gold prices go out of hand, then that's an obvious and historically also well recognized warning signal that there's something wrong.
So they're trying to cover it up.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a warning signal, so you don't want that warning signal to go off, right? So you keep the gold price low, and then the warning bell is not ringing. How they're doing it? Well, the biggest owners of gold are central banks, so there are ways of suppressing it when you are the biggest players in the market. But apart from the outright sales, which is a sort of last resort, but even that has been practiced in the past, what you can do is use paper gold, essentially derivatives of gold, and try to manipulate the market. And it's quite well known that the gold derivative transactions are a vast multiple of the underlying gold. And so a lot seems to be done through that as well.